Welcome to this explainer on the evolution of 19th century evangelicalism and the industrial shift. We're going to be diving into a period of American history where absolutely everything changed. We are talking about the leap from quiet, family-run farms to massive, grinding city factories. And as you'll see, that rapid, kind of violent economic shift set the stage for some massive earthquakes in both religion and society. Okay, we're actually going to start with a bit of deep irony. There was this Sunday school teacher named Edward Kimball, and he had a young pupil named D.L. Moody. Now, Moody had just moved to Boston to work in a shoe shop, and he really wanted to join a local church. But when he applied, the membership committee literally flat out rejected him. They genuinely believed his mind was just too spiritually dark, which, wow, is a pretty brutal assessment, right? But the thing is, the kid didn't know a single verse of the Bible. They basically concluded there was no way he'd ever be of any real public use. It took him a full year of stubborn, persistent studying just to get his foot in the door of that congregation. It sets up the ultimate underdog narrative because this exact same young man, the one written off as a hopeless case, would go on to become one of the most famous figures of the 19th century. So, how exactly does a hopeless case completely flip the script? Well, let's trace his incredibly rapid and totally unconventional ascent. In 1856, he leaves Boston, heads over to Chicago, and starts up a shoe business that does really well. But he also starts aggressively recruiting kids right off the streets for Sunday school. He gets so into it that he just steps away from selling shoes entirely to focus full-time on ministry. Through the 1860s, he's out there preaching to Civil War troops. And then, by 1873, he launches a massive preaching tour in the UK. By the time he comes back to America, he is an international superstar, welcomed by thousands. And here is the craziest part of this whole timeline. Moody was never formally ordained. The whole shebang was accomplished entirely as a layperson. To really get why he was so popular, you have to think about the guys who came before him, like Charles Finney. Finney brought this really aggressive, lawyer-like intensity to the pulpit. He'd preach for 2 straight hours, lock eyes with people, and literally call out sinners hiding up in the balcony. It was intense. Moody, though, total opposite. He was this homespun storyteller. He stood up there and felt more like your grandfather, just telling really relatable Bible stories. Even though he lacked any fancy university or seminary training, that warm, down-to-earth approach was a huge hit, making him globally influential. Because he wasn't formally ordained, Moody had to build his early ministry from the ground up, basically relying on 4 really practical, highly social pillars. First, he became a regular fixture at these big interdenominational Sunday school conventions. Second, he preached to troops during the Civil War, which is actually fascinating because he considered himself a Quaker pacifist. Talk about a tough crowd. Later, he established his own independent church in Chicago. But the 4th pillar? That one is absolutely crucial for understanding this entire era. He served as the president of the Chicago YMCA. Now, when we hear YMCA today, we usually just think of a place to hit the gym or go swimming, right? But back then, the Young Men's Christian Association was explicitly founded as a hardcore evangelistic outreach ministry. During the 19th century, massive waves of young men, many of them immigrants, were flooding into cities to work in these grueling factory jobs. They were totally disconnected from their families and their traditional support networks. So the YMCA stepped right into that gap. They provided a place to sleep and met physical and social needs, sure, but primarily, it was there to be a spiritual lifeline in a really harsh, unforgiving new urban environment. Moody himself had a very specific way of looking at his work. He called it a lifeboat ministry. He famously said that the world was like a ship going down, and his only job was to row out that lifeboat and pull as many drowning souls from the freezing water as possible. It was 100% focused on individual salvation, saving one person at a time. And nailing down that mindset is super important before we zoom out and take a look at the broader, boiling societal issues that were literally happening right outside his church doors. So the crucial point we need to understand is that while Moody is out there rowing his lifeboat, the entire American landscape is undergoing a violent, massive shift. We are talking about rapid urbanization. It was a real game changer. The economy was transitioning away from a quiet agrarian model, life ruled by the seasons and the family structure, and shifting into massive crowded urban centers totally dominated by the factory system. And with the railroad system exploding across the country, the demand for city-produced goods skyrocketed, which meant those factories, they had to run constantly. The emotional and structural toll of this shift was just devastating. It completely shattered the traditional patriarchal farm life that people had known for generations upon generations. Immigrants and rural workers poured into these cities and suddenly found themselves completely isolated. And even if a whole family managed to migrate together, the demands of the factory meant everyone, the husband, the wife, the kids, were all working separate, completely grueling shifts. So that family structure, which had always been the absolute center of human life, was breaking down entirely. And then there's the money. Before 1835, the average pay for these grinding factory jobs was just $6 a week. Just $6. That is barely $1 a day. Let that sink in for a second. Even as the decades crept on, wages remained so fundamentally incredibly low that a fully grown man working full-time couldn't secure enough income to provide even a basic level of existence for his family. This wasn't just poor pay. It was a vicious, systemic trap. And because the pay was so terrible, families had absolutely no choice but to send everyone to the factories just to survive. The human cost was staggering. We are talking men, women, and, get this, children as young as 5 years old standing at factory looms. And they were doing this for 14 hours a day. 14 hours, often 6 or 7 days a week, with absolutely no weekend or Sabbath rest. It was just this relentless, exhausting cycle that consumed their entire existence. And what did they go home to after a 14-hour shift? Visceral nightmares. By 1900, New York's Lower East Side was the most densely populated area in the entire world. Picture a family of 8, crammed into 3 tiny rooms, 5 flights up. In some of these tenements, the dad worked as a tailor right there in the kitchen. That meant a massive iron stove had to be running all day long to press clothes, even when it was 105 degrees outside in the dead of summer. No air conditioning, absolutely no running water in the apartments, and the only shared toilets were all the way down in the dark basement. It's almost unimaginable. The sheer tide of incoming workers caused every single organ of city life to strain until bursting. The cities simply were not built to handle this kind of influx. Municipal governments couldn't even come close to keeping up with the need for building regulations or sanitation or health systems. Everything was lacking. Basic roads, paving, streetlights, police officers, doctors, hospitals, you name it, they didn't have enough of it. The result was a completely unlivable environment where unchecked diseases just ravaged these tenement families. This era created what is honestly a horrific contrast. On one side of the tracks, you got this crushing, disease-ridden poverty of the workers trapped in those tenements. But on the other side, a tiny elite group of financiers who controlled these factories were becoming unimaginably wealthy. They were building these massive, sprawling estates, like the famous Newport mansions in Rhode Island. We're talking elaborate marble ballrooms that required 60 to 70 servants just to maintain. And the wildest part of the whole thing, the owners only lived in these homes for about 8 weeks during the summer. The economic gap between the workers and the owners was absolute, and it was immense. Eventually, that kind of systemic inequality becomes totally impossible to ignore. It paved the way for historical figures like Walter Rauschenbusch. He looked around at the squalor of the city streets and then at the extreme, ridiculous wealth of the factory owners and realized, okay, something has got to change. The church was essentially being forced to look in the mirror and ask what its responsibility was in the face of this brutal industrial system. Unlike Moody's laser focus on saving one person at a time, Rauschenbusch realized that addressing individual souls just wasn't enough anymore. They had to confront the massive economic gaps and the systemic living conditions of the industrial age head-on. So, I want to leave you with this compelling tension to think about. We started our journey with D.L. Moody, right? A guy who viewed his job purely as rowing a little lifeboat, pulling drowning individuals out of the water one by one. But as that relentless industrial machine grinds on, creating inescapable poverty and crushing entire generations of the working class, a single lifeboat is no longer enough. The question becomes, how does a church, a movement focused entirely on individual salvation, suddenly pivot to fight massive, systemic, societal rot? It's a fundamental shift in worldview, and it's a shift that redefined labor, social safety nets, and ultimately changed the course of history. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gives you a fresh perspective on the complex forces that shaped our modern world. Catch you next time.